All right, guys, so this is probably going to be one of the more important videos I do on my channel because I think this topic right here is important, especially when we're talking about the whole reparations conversation and we're talking about history, okay, and what is real history and what history is being taught and what history is not being taught. I think it's important for us to understand the totality of what slavery was and what it entails, because the way that it's told over here is that it kind of goes like this. The white man came from Europe. He went over to Africa. He stole black people from Africa and brought them back to the New World, okay, America, and that's just kind of how it went, right? And they leave out the nuance of the fact that, one, slavery was happening all over the world, and then two, whites weren't the only ones responsible for getting those slaves and obtaining those black people from Africa. Okay, you had multiple different people, groups, and tribes involved, including Africans themselves and Arabs that were also involved in the trade. Okay, and also whites were being enslaved too in Eastern Europe and stuff like that by Arabs. And here in the United States, you also had black slave owners as well that were enslaving black people. You also had white indentured servants. That's what historians call them, particularly people that were Irish. You had Native Americans that owned slaves. Okay, Native Americans were slaves at some point, even though it was a lot harder to enslave the natives because they knew the land, and just quite honestly, they'd rather die than be slaves. But I'm just saying, the history of slavery and everything that was going on during that time period is simply not taught in schools. And it's not told because that's not the narrative that people want to hear. The narrative that people want to hear is that the white man is evil, right? And him alone, he's so powerful that he is solely responsible for what happened during slavery. Nobody else. So what I'm going to react to here is Thomas Sowell actually telling the truth about black Americans being stolen from Africa and the full story about what happened. Okay, so this is an excerpt out of his book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Okay, and again, I'm going to react to him telling the truth about what happened here. But before I get into that, I just want to let you guys know, if you like my commentary, you like my channel, please feel free to support my channel using the links in the description below. You can support the Patreon, you can support the PayPal, you can support the merch. There are multiple ways to support the channel if you would like to do so, including getting yourself one of my signature racist mugs, which is a daily reminder of the 2022 definition of racist according to the left, which is anybody that disagrees with the Democrat Party. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
Form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley. Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by." Contrary to the myths to live by, created by Alex Haley and others, Africans were by no means the innocents portrayed in Roots, baffled as to why white men were coming in and taking their people away in chains. On the contrary.
Which is literally what everybody thinks, right? That's literally what everybody thinks. It's, oh, God, the white man just came in and just stole all the blacks, and there was no help from anybody that was there to help facilitate this, okay? Even though it was hard for the white man to actually get into Central Africa, right? That's not an easy place to invade and just go, take people, okay? Obviously, there has to be some people that are helping you from the inside. But again, people don't really think about that stuff.
The region of West Africa from which Kunta Kinte supposedly came was one of the great slave trading regions of the continent, before, during, and after the white man arrived. It was Africans who enslaved their fellow Africans, selling some of these slaves to Europeans or to Arabs and keeping others for themselves.
Dang, 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 dang. So when people want to have this reparations conversation and who committed the original sin, I'm like, hey, maybe y'all should go back to Africa and ask for your reparations, because you wouldn't have been sold to the white man had you not been enslaved by the African man first, right? So maybe you should go to Africa, go to the Gambia, and demand some reparations from the people that are descended from these tribal leaders that enslaved our ancestors, that allow and facilitated the white man bringing them over here to the United States, right? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. I want to know who committed the original sin. I don't think it's the way that the history books tell us.
Even at the peak of the Atlantic slave trade, Africans retained more slaves for themselves than they sent to the Western Hemisphere. This pattern was not confined to West Africa, from which most slaves were sent to the Western Hemisphere. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors.
Y'all hear how the Arabs keep getting brought up? Right? The Arabs were huge in this stuff. They was huge on slavery. I don't see anybody condemning the Arabs for their role in slavery. And they was some of the biggest slave traders on the planet, right?
As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year.
Didn't I just tell y'all that? I just tell you, it's not easy to get into Central Africa, right? It's not easy. In order for you to actually be able to get into a continent like that, you have to have help. Somebody has to be facilitating it, okay? Because it's not easy to survive, right? People, they don't think through this stuff logically when, they're being told this narrative. You have to question the narrative. Like, does this actually really make sense? Is what they're telling you actually really makes sense, okay? Does it really make sense that the white man, him and him alone, was just able to just get all these slaves from Africa? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, okay? Then that's not to say that, hey, it was that absolves them of what happened. That's not to say that, but at the same time, this is just what was the thing back in the day, and it wasn't just solely a thing that is attributed to white people, right? Arabs were doing it, Africans were doing it, right? And when people try to act like it is solely something that white people do, what you're actually really doing is making white people out to be more powerful than they actually are, right? You're making the Europeans to be out to be more powerful than they actually are when you say, well, no, only they can be enslavers, right? Only they can be the boss, right? Nobody else can be the boss. Everybody else is just victims. They really don't understand power dynamics and how language and how you tell stories and history plays into people's perceptions of who they are subconsciously, right? When you're always telling a certain group of people that throughout history you guys conquered and dominated everything, right? What you're telling them is that you were born to lead. You're born to rule over other people, and you come from a family of rulers, right? You come from an ancestry that is just conquerors, right? And when you tell other people that you've been conquered all throughout history, okay, you've been a victim all throughout history, subconsciously you're telling them that your bloodline, that what you come from is just a group of people who've always been victims. You've always been a victim in life, and that's it. Again, that stuff subconsciously plays in people's heads, and they don't really realize that when they're telling these stories.
By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible. Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place.
Again, who committed the original sin? Okay, these guys established the conditions in which slave sales took place, and they facilitated it because the white man simply could not get deep enough into Central Africa to actually do this stuff, right? So again, who was gathering all those people up? Africans. Right? Does that mean that black people should hate Africans? No, that's not what it means. But again, if you're going to point the finger at somebody, right, for who's responsible for slavery, I think that there's an argument to be made that the people that committed the original sin are not necessarily the Europeans. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia.
And see, here's another thing too. Again, people might find the stuff I'm saying to be controversial, but I just keep it 100. I'm just being real. People who are descendants of slaves here in the United States, including myself, I believe that my family is a descendant of slaves. That's what I believe. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure that is the case. I either would have been a slave here, or I would have been a slave in Africa. Right? Either way, I would have been screwed, because I'm pretty sure that the descendants of slaves in Africa are not in good socioeconomic positions right now, right? I'm pretty sure they're not. And even the ones that are not descendants of slaves are still not in good socioeconomic positions in Africa compared to how black people are doing in the United States, right? And see, this is why all these people that want to cry and complain about, oh my God, it's so bad in America as a black person. I'm like, bro, you just don't understand. If you were in the same position in Africa, if the white man never came, your family still would have been slaves, right? Because there were slaves in Africa, which is why they were sold to the Europeans in the first place. Still would have been slaves, and you still would have been at the bottom of the totem pole in Africa, right? You would have been at the bottom of the totem pole. And I think being at the bottom of the totem pole in Africa is much worse than being at the bottom of the totem pole in America. I'm just saying. I'm just keeping it 100, okay? I'm just keeping it 100.
In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda. The Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba. And the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before.
Ding, 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 ding. Again, original sin. Okay, if you're looking for your reparations, I think you need to go to these descendants of these African tribes, these leaders that were responsible for slavery, right? Actually facilitating slavery. I think that's what people need to go if they're looking for reparations. I'm keeping it a whole 100 with you, okay? I'm just saying, this is a story that's not told. People really can't contextualize slavery in the right way, and that's why they get so mad and they direct their anger towards people that don't have anything to do with it, okay? You are better off pointing your finger back at Africa than you are at some random white person on the street for slavery, because most random white people on the street, they're not descendants of slave owners, right? And actually, you know, a lot of their ancestors came over here after slavery, right? But again, you're being told that, hey, you know, the average white person, they're evil, right? That they, you know, are responsible for slavery and et cetera, okay? But you never told the real history of it. But, hey, it is what it is. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.